Hey there, come closer to the fire for a while, because the oldest question about human beings may be resting in a museum case, pressed into clay by a hand that died 4,000 years ago. The tablet is not large. It is smaller than a modern paperback, heavy in the quiet way. Old clay can be heavy, with edges softened by time and rows of wedge-shaped marks cut into its surface. In the University of Pennsylvania Museum, a creation text connected with the catalog number CBS 1673 waits behind glass, under careful light, cool air, and the patient silence of objects that have outlived the kingdoms that made them. What makes it unsettling is not that it says humans were created. Many old cultures say that. What makes it unsettling is how it says it. The language does not simply feel like a hymn. It does not only rise in beautiful smoke toward the gods. It lists materials: clay, blood, essence, a goddess who mixes, a wise god who provides the plan, a being with intelligence whose life substance becomes part of the work, a new creature called Lulu, a worker, a mixed one, something made to carry a burden that older beings no longer wanted to carry. That is the image we are entering tonight. Not a clean answer. Not proof laid neatly on a table. Something stranger than proof. A set of ancient words that may be myth, may be theology, may be memory, or may be a Bronze Age way of describing a process for which there were no modern words yet. If you enjoy slow, ancient mysteries told softly by the fire, like this video and subscribe, so we can keep opening these old clay doors together. Now let the room settle. Let the fire be small and warm. You do not need to believe the strangest reading of the tablets. You only need to listen closely to what the old scribes chose to preserve. Picture the museum after the loud hours have passed. The last groups have drifted away. Shoes no longer click across the polished floor. The signs on the walls sit quietly in their frames. The air is steady, filtered, almost too clean for an object born from river mud. Behind glass, the tablet rests at a slight angle, its brown surface catching light from above. If you lean close, the wedge marks seem to gather shadow inside themselves. Each mark was made when the clay was soft. Each mark was pressed by a reed stylus, a small tool cut from a plant near water. One wedge, then another, then another. The hand moved, the words formed, the tablet dried, and time began its long work. A tablet is not like a monument carved for crowds. It is close to the hand. It remembers pressure. It keeps the gesture of the scribe. The person who wrote it may have paused to wet the clay, to smooth an edge, to correct a line, to lean nearer to the lamp because the room had darkened. Maybe outside the tablet house, someone led animals through dust. Maybe a canal breathed faintly in the distance, carrying water through a land where civilization had already learned to count, tax, pray, and worry. And into that damp clay, the scribe pressed a story of human beginning. The mainstream reading is calm and reasonable. Ancient peoples created origin stories. They used the materials of their own world. A culture that knew pottery imagined gods shaping people from clay. A culture that knew birth, imagined divine mothers. A culture that knew sacrifice, imagined blood as life. Scholars have every reason to be careful. A myth is not a laboratory report simply because it contains steps. A symbol can be precise. A ritual can be repeated with care. Religious language can preserve order without preserving modern science. That caution matters. Honestly, it would be foolish to treat every ancient image as hidden technology just because it sounds unusual to us. The past does not exist to flatter our theories. It has its own language, its own poetry, its own sacred habits. When Sumerian texts speak of clay, the simplest meaning may be clay. When they speak of blood, the simplest meaning may be blood. When they speak of gods, the simplest meaning may be gods within their own religious world. And yet, the source we are following asks us to sit with the discomfort that remains after caution has done its work. Because the creation language is not loose, it is steady. Across texts and cities and centuries, the same pattern returns. A problem among divine workers. A wise god. A birth goddess. Clay from the earth or the deep fresh waters. Blood or essence from a sacrificed being. Mixing. Gestation. The emergence of a worker meant to take up the toil. The story does not keep changing its mechanism the way many myths do. It keeps returning to the same procedure. Clay and essence. Mixing. A worker. A burden transferred. This is where the word Lulu becomes important. In many translations, it becomes man or human, and the strangeness vanishes like mist. But the source lingers over the word. Lu can mean man, person, servant, worker. The doubled form Lulu may carry the sense of a maid worker, a primitive worker, a mixed being, a specially formed kind. Linguists debate such things, and they should. Ancient words do not always open politely for modern readers. But the context keeps pulling the meaning toward labor. Let the Lulu bear the yoke. Let him carry the toil of the gods. That sentence is not delicate. It says the new being is made for work, not made first for beauty, not first for companionship, not first for worship, at least not in the beginning of this particular story. Made to relieve a labor crisis. Made because those who had been digging, hauling, and reshaping the land had grown weary. The gods, in the Atrahasis tradition, have a workplace problem. That almost sounds funny for a moment. The divine world has invented management. The workers have had enough. Someone in heaven needs a meeting. If there were ancient coffee in the council chamber, I imagine it was very strong. But the humor fades quickly, because the solution is not rest. The solution is us. The older workers rebel. The higher gods convene. Enki, the god of wisdom and the deep, fresh waters, proposes the creation of a substitute. The birth goddess, called by different names in different versions. Ninto, Ninhursag, Beletile, Mami, is brought into the process. A being called Geshtu-i in some versions, associated with intelligence, is selected. His blood, his life essence, his thinking quality, is combined with clay. The language is not modern. Of course it is not modern. There is no word there for cell. No word for chromosome. No word for gene. No word for biological template. The old scribe had blood, clay, breath, womb, essence, spirit, mixing, birth. Those were the available vessels of meaning. The speculative reading says, what if those words are not merely poetic? What if clay means terrestrial base material? What if blood means inherited essence, life code, the thing that carries traits? What if mixing means the combination of two kinds? What if the Lulu is a hybrid worker, made from earth and something that descended from elsewhere? We cannot be sure. We should not pretend certainty where clay gives us only marks, but the feeling of the text is procedural enough to make the room feel colder. The tablet does not shout. It does not try to persuade us. It sits behind glass and lets us decide whether the old words are metaphor or memory. That may be why the story is so haunting. A dramatic myth would be easier to dismiss. A dry procedure is harder. It feels less like a song and more like a note preserved because someone thought the steps mattered. The word mixed keeps returning. Not blessed, not merely shaped. Mixed. A bowl of clay. A measure of water. Something red and living. Hands or divine hands folding one into the other. The material becoming neither what it was before nor entirely what was added to it. The result given a purpose before it can speak for itself. If you were standing beside the case with me, I would not ask you to accept the wildest version. I would only ask you to look at the tablet a little longer than visitors usually do. Past the label, past the academic category, past the comfort of the word mythology, which can sometimes become a soft blanket thrown over things that still have sharp edges. So when they preserve the same creation sequence again and again, we may at least listen. Clay from earth. Essence from a being of higher order. A wise designer. A birth specialist. A mixing. A gestation. A worker. And behind all of that, the Anunnaki. Beings described as descending from heaven, organizing cities, assigning labor, granting knowledge, and shaping the early world. Mainstream scholarship places them within the rich landscape of Mesopotamian religion, and that is where any careful study must begin. The Anunnaki are gods in Sumerian and Akkadian texts, part of a divine hierarchy. Their stories are myths, rituals, theology, social imagination, and political symbolism. That reading is not weak. It is the ground under our feet. But the source asks whether the ground has another layer beneath it. What if myth is sometimes the shape memory takes after technology is forgotten? What if a Bronze Age scribe, seeing or inheriting a story of biological alteration, would describe it exactly in the language of clay, blood, mixing, womb, and worker? What if the oldest written human origin story is not simply saying that humans were made from earth? What if it is saying that something was added? Something that made us strange? That thought touches a quiet feeling many people have never quite named. We are made of minerals, water, honga, skin, bone, and breath. We need food from soil. We are animals, undeniably. And still, we look up at the stars with a longing no other creature seems to carry in the same way. Maybe that longing is only consciousness. Or maybe, as the old speculative reading whispers, it is the ache of a mixed origin. The tablet does not tell us which. It waits. The museum lights hum softly. Outside the museum, modern streets move with traffic and voices. Inside the glass, the old question keeps its shape. Were humans born only from Earth? Were we shaped by gods, as myth says? Were we modified by beings the texts called gods because no other word could hold them? The fire beside us lowers a little. The room grows warmer. The story does not demand belief, only attention. And attention now leads us away from the glass case and down into the desert mound where so many tablets were found. Beneath the dust of Nippur, in trenches cut through thousands of years of broken brick and forgotten rooms, the old scribes left not one sentence, but a world of sentences. To understand the strange creation tablet, we have to go there, into heat, excavation, read marks, temple libraries, and the buried city that made Sumer speak again. Nippur rises from the flat land like a memory the desert has not finished burying. In the old records, it was not the greatest political capital. It was not the city that always held the strongest army or the richest palace. Its power was quieter and older. Nippur was sacred. It was the city of Enlil, the place where divine authority was imagined to gather, where kings from other cities sought legitimacy, where the world of gods and the world of rulers touched through ritual, offering, and law. By the time modern excavators arrived, that sacred city had become a mound, a tell, layer upon layer of collapsed brick, ash, broken pottery, buried rooms, and wind-packed dust. The city had not vanished in one clean moment. Cities almost never do. They sink slowly into themselves. A wall falls. A new wall rises over it. A floor becomes a foundation. A courtyard becomes debris. Centuries settle like blankets. Then one day, people who speak another language stand above the old streets and call them ruins. The year is 1889. The University of Pennsylvania expedition arrives in southern Mesopotamia with tools, cameras, surveying gear, notebooks, crades, ambition, and the unspoken belief that the earth beneath their feet may hold the earliest chapters of urban humanity. John Punnett Peters leads the early work, and Hermann Hilprecht later becomes deeply tied to the study of the tablets. The landscape is not gentle. Heat presses down. Wind moves dust across the camp. Water is precious. The horizon is wide, pale, and almost empty, as if the land has erased its own edges. Imagine the first morning in the trench. The workers gather before the sun becomes cruel. Baskets wait. Picks strike soil. Shovels scrape. Dust climbs into clothing and hair. A notebook lies open on a board. Someone calls out when a fragment appears. It may be nothing. A potsherd, a bit of brick, a broken seal, or it may be a tablet, still holding words after thousands of years underground. To excavate a place like Nippur is to move through time with a hand tool. The upper layers are younger. Later empires, later repairs, later people who walked over the dead city without knowing the depth beneath them. Then older levels appear. Persian traces, Babylonian traces, Cassid dress, old Babylonian rooms. Then deeper still, toward the Sumerian beginning. Each layer is a page made of earth. Each page has been torn, burned, trampled, reused, and half forgotten. And then came the tablets. Not a few, not enough to fill a single shelf and make a pleasing little display. Tens of thousands of clay tablets and fragments came from Nippur, overwhelming in number and variety. Some recorded rations: sheep, barley, oil, work crews, offerings. Some preserved school exercises, lists, hymns, myths, legal formulas, mathematical problems, prayers, and stories of gods. A civilization spoke not in one voice, but in an entire archive of ordinary and sacred life. That is what makes Nippur so powerful. A myth alone can drift. An archive has weight, a receipt for sheep beside a hymn, to a god beside a school, list beside a creation. Story tells us that these were not stray fantasies floating in the dark. They belonged to a scribal world that recorded, copied, taught, and preserved. The same culture that counted grain also wrote of creation. The same hand trained in accounting could copy a myth with careful columns. For the Sumerians, the practical and the sacred were not enemies. They lived on the same clay. Some tablets were baked by accident in fires that destroyed the buildings holding them. Fire ruined the rooms, but saved the words. The source we are following sees something more in this archive. It argues that Sumerian civilization appears with startling sophistication. Writing, mathematics, law, astronomy, medicina, architecture, irrigation, administration, and temple organization seem already highly developed in early levels. Not crude beginnings, not a long visible trail of hesitant attempts, but a system that arrives working. Some scholars would slow us down here, and rightly so. Archaeology is incomplete. Earlier stages may lie in places not yet excavated, or in materials that did not survive. Development can happen beyond the neat view of our trenches. A civilization can look sudden because our evidence is broken. We should remember that the ground never gives us a full book, only torn pages. Still, the suddenness has a strange power. Cuneiform appears early as a system already capable of doing its work. Cities show planning. Temples are massive. Labor is specialized. Numbers are sophisticated. The base 60 system appears with force and usefulness. It still touches us in 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and the circle of 360 degrees. That is not a small inheritance. A hand pressed numbers into clay long ago, and somehow your clock is still listening. The source asks, where is the long, visible childhood of this knowledge? Where are the clumsy early drafts? Where is the slow stumble from simple counting to mathematical elegance? From scattered huts to temple economies? From local memory to archives? Mainstream scholarship has answers, or at least cautions. No civilization truly appears from nothing. Sumer grew from older cultures of southern Mesopotamia. Village, irrigation, trade, and ritual developed across long periods. What looks sudden from far away may be gradual up close. This is fair. The story of civilization is always more layered than a single dramatic phrase. But the Sumerians themselves often described their civilization in another way. They said knowledge was given. Kingship was lowered from heaven. The arts of civilization, the me, came from the gods. The first cities existed before the flood. They did not present themselves only as inventors, struggling upward from mud. They presented themselves as inheritors, receivers, caretakers of gifts that came from a higher order or an older age. Again, the mainstream reading is strong. Ancient cultures often place their institutions under divine authority. To say kingship came from heaven is to make kingship sacred. To say writing or law came from gods is to give social order cosmic legitimacy. A king who says the gods gave him rule is not providing a modern history lesson. He is making a claim about power, but the source keeps returning to the same discomfort. Why does the claim repeat so precisely? Why does knowledge appear in such organized forms? Why do the me behave in texts almost like transferable packages, things that can be held, carried, stolen, gifted, lost, recovered? The me are one of the strangest ideas in Sumerian literature. They are often translated as divine powers, decrees, or principles of civilization. That translation is useful, but it does not fully catch their texture. They are not merely ideas floating in the mind. They can be possessed. They can be moved from one city to another. In the myth of Inanna and Enki, Inanna receives them from Enki at Eridu and carries them to Uruk, while Enki later tries to get them back. The story can be read as political mythology. Uruk claiming the powers of civilization through a sacred tale. But the source hears something else beneath it. It hears knowledge transfer, discrete capacities, kingship, writing, metalwork, music, law, craft, judgment, desire, counsel, victory, each one named as if civilization were made of separable operating parts. It is a beautiful image, and a troubling one. Civilization not as a slow accident. Civilization as a set of instructions delivered. If an advanced power wanted to lift a working population quickly into city life, it might give agriculture, measurement, law, administration, craft, metallurgy, astronomy, and ritual all at once, or nearly all at once. Not as vague inspiration, but as structured knowledge. The Sumerians would have called those gifts me. We do not have to accept that reading as fact, but we can understand why it tempts the imagination. The excavators at Nippur found not only myths of creation, but the living infrastructure of a scribal civilization. School tablets show students learning signs and words. Lexical lists classify the world. Administrative texts show the machinery of temple and city. Mathematical tablets reveal calculation. Legal texts show judgment. Hymns show theology. The archive is not chaotic. It is ordered. The tablet house must have been a place of discipline. Imagine a young scribe sitting cross-legged with a lump of prepared clay on his palm. The teacher recites. The student copies. The reed presses. Too hard, and the mark widdens. Too soft, and the sign fades. Clay is forgiving only for a little while. After it dries, the mistake becomes history, which is a frightening thought for any student with bad handwriting. Around him, other students murmur lists. Trees, stones, birds, officials, gods, cities, words paired with other words. Sumerian beside Akkadian. Old signs explain for new generations. The room smells of damp clay, reid, oil, dust, and warm bodies. Outside, the city breathes through canals and streets. Inside, reality is being arranged into columns. This is how a civilization keeps itself from forgetting. That matters because the source sees the Sumerian tablets as more than imagination. It sees them as preservation, the repeated creation language, the consistent role of Enki, the birth goddess, the clay, the divine blood, the worker, the me, the flood, the pre-flood kings, the given knowledge. Each piece belongs to a larger pattern. Maybe the pattern is mythic. Maybe it is social memory. Maybe it is theological poetry. Or maybe, as the speculative reading insists, Sumer was preserving a distorted but stubborn memory of contact with beings who arrived before human civilization, shaped a worker species, transferred knowledge, and then left humans to inherit systems they did not invent. The mound does not answer. It only gives tablets. And even those tablets do not speak without help. For centuries, cuneiform was silent to modern eyes. The wedge marks were visible, but unreadable, like bird tracks crossing dried mud. People could collect them, display them, wonder over them, and still not hear the voices inside. To go farther into the mystery, the script itself had to be opened. That opening was not gentle. It happened through cliff faces, royal inscription, long comparisons, dangerous copying, and the patient labor of scholars willing to spend years on signs smaller than fingernails. A dead language had to learn how to breathe again. So leave Nippur for a moment, but keep its dust on your hands. Ahead is the decipherment, the great unlocking of cuneiform, and the realization that beneath Babylonian and Akkadian lay an older tongue with no family, no living children, and a vocabulary that seemed to preserve technical knowledge from nowhere we can easily name. The first problem with the tablets was simple and almost cruel. People could see them, but they could not hear them. For centuries, cuneiform signs sat in collections like little fields of dried bird tracks. Travelers found them. Dealers sold them. Scholars sketched them. Museums placed them under glass. But the marks remained silent. A wedge here, a corner there, a repeated cluster that seemed important because it returned again and again, yet gave no sound, no name, no memory. Imagine standing before one of those tablets before decipherment. You can tell it is writing. That is the strange part. It has order. It has rows. It has intention. It is not ornament. It is not random damage. Some ancient hand clearly wanted these marks to carry meaning across time, and time did carry them, very faithfully, all the way into rooms where no one could read them. It is like receiving a letter from the dead with every word still visible, and no key to the language. The key came slowly. Far from Nippur, on a cliff in western Iran, a royal inscription had been cut high into the stone by order of Darius I. The place is known as Behistun. The text stood above the road, carved where it could be seen but not easily touched. It was a message of power. Kings have always liked to place their names where ordinary hands cannot reach them. Perhaps it makes the words feel closer to heaven. Or perhaps kings simply enjoy inconvenient architecture. There, on the rock face, the same message appeared in 3 languages. Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian. That was the opening. Henry Rawlinson copied the inscription in the 19th century, working on the cliff in conditions that sound uncomfortable enough to make a modern scholar clutch his coffee. Wind moved against the rock. The surface was high and dangerous. The signs had to be copied with care, because one mistaken wedge could send a whole word astray. Old Persian yielded first. Once that door opened, Babylonian began to speak. Babylonian used cuneiform, and from Babylonian, scholars could begin to approach older Mesopotamian texts. The system was not one language, but a writing technology. Like the alphabet today, can carry English, French, Vietnamese, and many others. Cuneiform carried Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and more. The wedges were a shared doorway into different voices. Then came Sumerian. Sumerian was difficult in a special way. It did not belong neatly to known language families. It was not Semitic like Akkadian. It stood alone, a language isolate, with grammar that built meaning through attached pieces and structure. To some early scholars, it looked so strange that they wondered if it had ever been spoken naturally at all. Maybe it was a sacred code. Maybe a priestly invention. Maybe a scholarly ghost living inside Babylonian tablets. The tablets answered patiently. School exercises appeared. Lexical lists appeared. Bilingual lists appeared, pairing Sumerian words with Akkadian explanations. Grammatical patterns repeated. Student copies preserved old signs with new glosses. Scribes had taught Sumerian to later generations as a learned language, the way later cultures taught Latin, Sanskrit, or other sacred tongues after everyday speech had moved on. It had been real. It had breathed. And then, through clay, It breathed again. I have always found something moving about that. A dead language is not dead in the way a body is dead. It waits differently. It can sleep for thousands of years, and then, when enough patient eyes gather around it, one word lifts. Then another, then a sentence, then a whole city begins speaking from the dust. The scribes had helped us without knowing it. They made lists. The Sumerians loved lists. It sounds humble, almost boring, until you realize lists are one of civilization's strongest defenses against forgetting. They listed animals, trees, stones, professions, cities, gods, tools, metals, status, body parts, and words paired with other words. They arranged reality into columns. A student could copy the same list many times, bored beyond measure, perhaps wishing the teacher would go outside for once and let everyone breathe. Yet that boredom became a gift to the future. Because when later scholars found those lists, the dead language gained ladders. A Sumerian word beside an Akkadian word. A sign repeated in predictable places. A divine name marked with the sign for God. A city identified. This is how the silence began to crack. And when Sumerian opened, its world was startlingly exact. The tablets preserved accounts, radios, legal disputes, land measures, omens, astronomical observations, medical recipes, hymns, school punishments, proverbs, and myth. The same writing system could track sheep and describe the beginning of humanity. That mixture is important. It means the scribal mind moved easily between practical detail and sacred story. This is where the source presses its claim. The language of creation, it says, behaves less like drifting poetry and more like a preserved technical sequence. The same terms return. The same materials return. The same roles return. The same purpose returns. Clay, blood, mixing, birth, worker. The word often translated as create is not always a word that means making from nothing. It can carry the feeling of bringing together, forming, combining, shaping something from parts. A potter mixes clay. A brewer mixes ingredients. A healer compounds substances. A craftsperson combines materials to produce a working result. When such language appears in creation texts, the mainstream reading sees sacred craft. The speculative reading hears procedure. Both readings can sit beside the lamp. In the mainstream view, the Sumerians are telling a profound myth about human condition. We are clay because we belong to earth. We carry divine essence because we have mind, breath, and consciousness. We work because the gods made us to sustain cosmic order. The story explains why human life is labor, why society serves temples, why offerings matter, why the world is arranged in hierarchy. That reading is elegant. It fits what myths do. But the source asks why the vocabulary is so stubborn. Why does the text specify the same pattern over and over? Why do different versions preserve the mixing of earthly material and divine blood? Why does the result so often appear as a worker, a being made to carry toil? Why do stories include failed attempts, adjustments, and gestation? Details that are not necessary if the point is only that humans serve the gods. The answer may still be myth. Myths can preserve strange details because ritual requires them. Ritual loves repetition. Theology can be precise. A story copied in scribal schools can remain stable because tradition demands stability. We should not mistake precision for modern science too quickly. Still, listen to the words as the source asks us to hear them. A base material is taken from earth, from clay, from the deep fresh waters of the Abzu. A higher essence is taken from a being associated with intelligence. The two are mixed thoroughly. A birth goddess presides. The result is not an angel, not an animal, not a god, but a new kind of worker. A Lulu, a mixed being, a primitive worker, a creature able to learn, speak, reproduce, and perform tasks the divine laborers no longer wish to perform. If a Bronze Age scribe inherited memory of biological alteration, what vocabulary could he use? He would not write gene. He would not write chromosome. He would not write genetic sequence. He would write blood, because blood carries kinship. He would write clay, because clay is the shapeless material from which form is made. He would write mixing, because joining two substances is what his world understood. He would write womb and birth, because living things do not emerge from tools alone. They develop. This does not prove the reading. It explains why the reading feels possible to some. The technical vocabulary around other parts of Sumerian life deepens the unease. The source points to terms for mathematics, astronomy, architecture, metalwork, medicina, and law that appear in highly developed forms. Mainstream scholars would explain this through long cultural development, earlier oral traditions, missing evidence, and gradual refinement before written preservation. That is reasonable. But the source sees something more like inheritance, as if a vocabulary arrived with the knowledge it described. The Sumerian texts give their own mythic answer. Enki, Eridu, the me, the decrees, powers, or blueprints of civilization, writing, kingship, metalwork, craft, music, law, priesthood, judgment, even troubling things like deceit and conflict, as if civilization were not only blessings but a full toolkit, bright tools and sharp tools stored in the same box. Inanna takes the me from Enki and brings them to Uruk. The story can be read as political myth. Yes, Uruk claiming sacred powers from older Eridu. But the source reads it almost like the transfer of information systems. Discrete capacities, each one named, carried, installed in a city. It is an unusual way to imagine culture. Not vague inspiration, but packages of function. A scribe would not say software or database. He would say me, divine decrees, the powers that make civilization possible. This is why decipherment matters to the larger mystery. Once the tablets could be read, they did not reveal a simple, primitive imagination. They revealed a culture that loved order, cataloging, sequence, and procedure. Their myths are poetic, but they are also organized. Their gods argue like administrators. Their creation scenes can sound like councils and workshops. Their civilization, whether gradually grown or partly inherited, knew how to preserve detail. So when the creation texts repeat their strange formula, the repetition deserves attention. Not blind belief. Attention. Clay, blood, mixing, birth, worker. The words seem simple, almost soft in the mouth. But in the tablet house, under an oil lamp, they would have had weight. The student copying them may have been thinking more about supper than about human origins. That is also human. Even the most profound sentence can be copied by someone who wants to go home. But the sentence survived him. It survived the teacher. It survived Nippur. It survived the burning of libraries, the fall of cities, the silence of languages, the long sleep of cuneiform, and the centuries when nobody could read it. Now it sits before us again. The dead language has opened. The signs have sound. The sound becomes words. The words describe a process, and the process leads us into the Atrahasis story, where the gods are tired, the lesser workers rebel. Enki proposes a solution, and the first human is not born from love or whim, but manufactured to bear a yoke. The Atrahasis story begins not with human beings, but with labor. Before humans enter the tale, the world is already divided, already ruled, already heavy with work. The gods are there, but not all gods sit in ease. Some command. Some plan. Some dwell in shining distance. Others dig. The lesser divine workers, often called the Igigi, carry the burden. They cut canals. They move earth. They open river paths. They reshape the wet land of Mesopotamia so fields can drink, cities can rise, and the world of the higher gods can be supplied. The work lasts year after year. Not one bright afternoon of sacred effort, but long toil. Mud on her hands, tools striking earth, shoulders aching. The same trench lengthening under the same sun. It is a strange thing to imagine gods exhausted. And yet, that is how the story holds them. Not as perfect beings floating above need, but as workers under command, pressed by labor until their divine patience thins. The canals of Mesopotamia were life itself, cut into the land by effort, maintained against silt, flood, drought, and collapse. The text gives that pain to the Igigi, and through them, the whole creation story begins as a labor dispute, a cosmic strike. The first crisis is not romance, not war, not a monster at the gate. It is workers saying, enough. They burn their tools. They gather in the dark. They march toward the house of Enlil, the powerful god associated with command, vent, and authority on earth. Their anger moves like a storm made of bodies. The night around the divine dwelling grows tense. The higher gods wake or are summoned. Voices rise The order of heaven and earth, so carefully arranged, trembles because those at the bottom of the labor system refuse to keep digging. The council meets. Anu is there, the sky, father, high authority. Enlil is there, alarmed and angered by rebellion. Enki is there, lord of the Apsu, clever, deep-minded, the one who often sees a path where others see only punishment. The mother goddess is called, under names that shift across versions, Nintu, Ninhursag, Beletili, Mami, mistress of birth, the one whose work is life made visible. Enlil wants order restored. Anu suggests that the complaint has a cause. Enki proposes a solution. Create a substitute worker. Let a new being carry the toil. There is the turn. The gods do not simply forgive the laborers. They do not abolish the work. They move the burden downward into a creature not yet made. The world needs canals. The gods do not want to dig them. So something else must be formed. The source reads this with unease, and it is easy to see why. Humanity does not enter as the beloved child of heaven. Not in this version. Humanity enters as a labor solution, a created class, a being whose purpose is stated before its first breath. Let the Lulu bear the yoke. Let the worker carry the toil of the gods. The phrase is hard, so let us hold it gently. In the mainstream reading, this is mythic theology. It explains why human life involves work, why temple service matters, why people provide offerings, why civilization is structured around labor and hierarchy. The myth places that social reality into sacred time. That is a reasonable reading. But the source asks us to notice how the making itself is described. The creation is not instant. It is not a god speaking a word and humans appearing whole. It is not a sculptor merely shaping clay and breathing. It is a process. First, a being must be chosen. In some versions, the name is Geshtu-e, a god connected with intelligence or understanding. This is not random material. The text stresses the quality of the being. Intelligence is involved. Consciousness is involved. Something in his blood matters. Something that must be transferred into the new creature. Then comes the clay. Clay from earth. Clay linked with the Abzu. The deep fresh waters under the world. Enki, realm of life. Hidden resources. Wisdom and origin. Clay is mud in the hand. Yes, but it is also the substance that takes form. A potter knows clay as potential. A scribe knows clay as memory. In these stories, clay becomes the base from which a living worker can be shaped. Then blood and clay are mixed. The source returns to that word again and again. Mixed. Not placed beside each other, not blessed from outside. Mixed. The divine essence and earthly material are combined until the new being carries both. The text says, in one form, that God and man are thoroughly mixed in the clay. The sentence seems to describe a joining of higher and lower components. To the mainstream reader, it is a sacred image. To the speculative reader, It sounds like integration. Now imagine the chamber. Do not make it loud. Make it quiet. A bowl of clay, darkened with water from the deep, hands moving slowly. A goddess who knows birth, bending over the mixture. Enki watching with the focus of a designer. The council nearby, relieved perhaps, or troubled, because once a new being is made, the world cannot return to what it was. The air smells of wet earth, lamp oil, and river mud. Somewhere beyond the walls, the rebel workers wait. The birth goddess prepares the material. The text gives a detail that feels almost too specific to ignore. 14 pieces of birth clay, 7 on the right, 7 on the left, a brick between them. The numbers may be ritual, symbolic, sacred, but the source here's arrangement, preparation, procedure. Not a vague miracle, but staged work. Then comes gestation. The months are counted. The 10th month arrives, the month of opening the womb. That detail matters in the source. If humans were only molded statues awakened by divine force, why count months? Why describe a womb? Why does the process take time? The mainstream answer is that birth imagery is natural to creation myth. The speculative answer is that the text remembers biological development after mixing. Again, no certainty, only the persistence of the details. When the first humans emerge, they are not simply ready kings or wise sages. They must learn. They must be trained for work. The created worker must become functional. This too fits both readings. A myth about human society can explain education and labor. A speculative record of engineered beings would also require development, training, and adaptation. The text does not give us a clean door. It gives us two shadows. One is myth. One is memory. And the candle between them flickers. The name Lulu stands at the end of the process. The mixed worker, the primitive worker, the being created to bear the yoke. The source leans hard on this word because it does not feel like a name of glory. It feels like a designation, a class, a function. If that is what the text means, then human origin in Atrahasis is not flattering. We are not made first to rule. We are made first to work. The yoke is placed before the crown. Perhaps that is why the story has such dark power. It looks at labor, one of the most ordinary and ancient human experiences, and says, this is not an accident. You carry work because you were made to carry it. You bend over fields because once others bent over canals and refused to continue. There is sorrow in that, but the source keeps looking beneath the theology. It asks whether the tale preserves a memory of an intervention, a population created or altered to perform tasks, a terrestrial base combined with a higher essence, a new species or subspecies designed for usefulness, a hybrid made capable enough to learn, but not equal to its makers. The word intelligence becomes crucial here. The sacrificed being is not described as valuable because of strength alone. His intelligence, understanding, or consciousness matters. That quality is in the blood, in the life substance. The new creature needs mind. Mind enough to learn irrigation, speech, tools, obedience, and the rhythms of work. The source asks it simply. Inherited information becomes blood. Biological raw material becomes clay. Combining traits becomes mixing. Development becomes gestation. A designed worker becomes Lulu. It fits so neatly that it can become dangerous. We should be careful with neatness. The mind loves patterns. It can find laboratories in myths if it wants them badly enough. The mainstream caution must remain beside us, steady as a hand on the table. These are religious texts. They live in ritual, poetry, and social meaning. To reduce the gods only to technicians would be another kind of misunderstanding. And yet, the procedural feel remains. Materials, roles, sequence, outcome. The Atrahasis story gives a labor crisis, a design proposal, a chosen intelligence source, a base material from Earth, a mixing, a birth process, and a worker species made for toil. Whether myth or memory, it is one of the strangest origin stories humanity has preserved. Now let the first Lulu breathe. Not loudly, not as a monster, not as a miracle surrounded by thunder. Imagine a small living body at the edge of the chamber, fragile and new, carrying within it the clay of earth and the life essence of something higher. Or so the text says. The gods look on. The rebel workers are relieved. The burden has found a new back. No one asks the newborn whether it agrees. That silence is the deepest darkness of the scene. Purpose arrives before choice. A yoke is waiting before a name. From that point onward, humans multiply. They learn. They work. They bring food to temples. They maintain canals. They become noisy. In later parts of the Atrahasis story, their noise will trouble the gods so much that destruction is considered. The beings made to solve one problem become a new problem. Every created worker, if given mind, eventually becomes more than work. The source sees in this the tragedy of design. If humans were made as Lulu, then our restlessness may be built into the contradiction. We are made from earth, but with a higher spark. Made for labor, but capable of poetry. Made to carry burdens, but forever looking upward. Made as workers, yet asking why the work exists at all. That may be why the story still reaches us. It is about feeling native to soil and homesick for stars, burdened and imaginative. The first human in Atrahasis is not given a throne, only a task. But inside the task is intelligence. Inside the clay is something from beyond clay. Inside the worker is the question that will one day read the tablet. The fire beside us settles lower, and the chamber of creation begins to fade. The tools of the Igigi lie cooling in ash. The divine council grows quiet. Enki returns to the deep waters. The new workers begin to learn the weight of the world. But the story is not finished, because other tablets speak of attempts that did not succeed, of forms that came out wrong, of a process refined through failure. and of a name, Lulu, that may preserve more than the simple word human. The word Lulu sits quietly in the clay, but it does not feel quiet once you begin listening to it. At first, translators often let it pass as man or human, and that makes the sentence softer. Humans are created. Humans work. Humans serve the gods. The old myth becomes familiar, almost ordinary. But the source asks us to slow down around that word, the way one might slow down beside a small dark stone on a path and realize it is not a stone at all, but a seal or a fragment of something once alive. Lu can mean man, Anuva, someone, and in many settings, a worker or servant. When doubled into Lulu, the shape changes. Some scholars treat the doubling as emphasis. Man of man, humanity, people as a group. That is possible. Sumerian grammar is old and patient, and it does not always answer our questions as politely as we want. But in the creation stories, the word stands inside a frame of labor. Let the Lulu bear the yoke. Let him carry the toil of the gods. The phrase is blunt in its own ancient way. The new being is made because another class of beings is tired. The new being is assigned work before it has history. The new being enters the world under a burden, and the burden has already been measured. That is why the source hears in Lulu something more specific than a poetic word for mankind. It hears a designation, a model name, a function, primitive worker, mixed worker, created servant, a being not simply born into the world, but brought into use. Hold that gently, because there are two ways to hear it. In the mainstream reading, the Lulu is humanity imagined through theology. People work because the gods made people to work. The myth explains temple service, agriculture, offerings, and the heavy rhythm of human life. It gives sacred meaning to toil. A farmer bending in a field is not merely poor or unlucky. He is participating in an order laid down at the beginning. That reading has human truth in it. Work is one of the oldest facts we know. Before kings, before philosophy, before museums, there were hands carrying water, cutting reeds, digging earth, grinding grain, mending baskets, raising children, cleaning tools, lifting stones, pulling weeds. Work is so old that every culture eventually asks why it must be so. The Atrahasis story gives one answer. We work because the divine workers refused, and the burden came to us. But the source keeps touching the harder edge of the word. If Lulu means made worker, what does that imply about origin? Not only destiny, origin. The Enki and Ninhursag story deepens this unease. In that composition, creation has the feel of a contest, a ritual game, and perhaps a teaching tale. The birth goddess creates several beings, and they are not all successful in ordinary human terms. One cannot function in one way. Another cannot see. Another cannot move properly. Another cannot reproduce. Enki assigns places or roles for some of them, and the story has layers of humor, compassion, theology, and social explanation. Mainstream scholars often read this as a myth about human difference. Why do some people live with disabilities? Why are some bodies weak? Why does society need to make places for those who cannot do ordinary work? In that reading, Enki becomes a divine figure who finds destinies for imperfect creations. And the myth becomes an ancient meditation on limitation, dependence, and care. That is a strong reading. It should not be thrown away. But the source hears another sound beneath it. Trial and error. A process that does not succeed the first time. A series of forms that come out wrong before a stable form appears. That is not how many creation myths work. A god speaks, and there is light. A potter shapes, and the figure receives breath. A divine maker wills, and the thing exists. But Enki and Ninma give something messier. Attempts, flaws, corrections. A discussion of what each being can and cannot do. In the speculative reading, this sounds less like pure symbol and more like early development work. A created organism must be viable. It must move. It must eat. It must communicate. It must reproduce. It must learn enough to perform useful labor. If the purpose is a worker population, then every failed ability matters. This is where the story grows dark, but quietly. Imagine not horror, not flashing metal, not anything crude. Imagine instead a chamber of patience and disappointment. Damp clay, bowls of water, hands washed again and again. A birth goddess whose face is not cruel, only tired with the seriousness of making living forms. Enki watching, not with anger, but with the calm attention of a craftsman whose design has not yet stabilized. A being opens its eyes, but cannot do what it was made to do. Another breathes, but cannot continue the line. Another survives, but cannot bear the work. The room adjusts. The process continues. A small human joke could live there too, though softly. Even Chotz, if these texts are believed, had prototypes that did not pass inspection. Anyone who has ever tried to assemble a chair from bad instructions may feel a faint kinship with the divine workshop, though the stakes here are heavier than a crooked leg. The seriousness returns. The source suggests that the Sumerian texts preserve something like iteration, not instant perfection, not magical completion. Iteration, an old wordless memory of trying again until the worker became stable. If so, the Lulu is not just created. The Lulu is refined. That possibility gives the word a colder texture. It means humanity, in this reading, is not the first thought of creation, but the successful version after earlier attempts. A working model. A compromise between earth material and something higher. Strong enough to labor. Intelligent enough to learn. Limited enough not to rival the makers. Limited. That word waits behind the creation scene. Because a worker who is too weak is useless. A worker who is too strong is dangerous. A worker who cannot understand instructions is useless. A worker who understands too much becomes a question no master wants answered. The Sumerian stories seem to know this tension. Humans are given mind. They are given language, training, and eventually the arts of civilization. But they are not made equal to the gods. They live briefly. They toil. They make offerings. They remember and forget. They build cities that flood, burn, and vanish. The source asks whether these limits are design choices. Mainstream scholarship says they are mythic expressions of human condition. The gods are immortal. Humans are immortal. The gods command. Humans serve. The gods possess full power. Humans possess partial understanding. This is theology. It does not need genetics to be profound. Still, the source notices that the texts often speak as if human limitations were set, not merely found. Set. The Lulu is made for a yoke. The Lulu is taught work. The Lulu is not given the whole power of the creators. The Lulu carries divine essence, but only enough to serve the purpose. That partial gift, mind without equality, wisdom without immortality, labor without full freedom, becomes the shape of human life. It is not hard to feel the sadness in that. We are animals of earth, but not content like animals of earth. We build shelters, then temples, then cities, then machines that leave the atmosphere. We ask why we die. We ask why our minds can imagine eternity while our bodies last only a little while. The source reads such things as clues of imperfect fit. Mainstream science reads them through evolution, adaptation, trade-offs, and selection. The sleep story voice should not pretend to settle that. It should only let the ancient discomfort breathe. The word Lulu becomes a mirror. If it means humanity, then humanity begins under labor. If it means mixed worker, then humanity begins under design. If it means both, then the myth is doing what great myths do. It holds social truth and cosmic unease in the same small vessel. Now, think again of the scribal school. A student copies the word Lulu. Wedge after wedge. Perhaps the teacher corrects the angle. Perhaps the student mutters that the clay is too dry. Perhaps outside, someone is repairing a canal bank, and the city depends on that repair more than any hymn admits. The word for human worker is copied in a room built by human workers, maintained by human workers, fed by fields worked by human workers. There is a circle there. The story of made labor is preserved by labor. The worker writes the word for worker. That may be the quietest tragedy of all. The source moves from this word into larger patterns. It asks why so many ancient cultures tell of humans made from earth and divine essence. Clay in Mesopotamia, a potter god in Egypt, a maker shaping human beings in Greek memory, failed creations in the Popol Vuh before the successful Maize people. Everywhere, matter from the ground receives something from above. Mainstream comparison says, this is because humans everywhere look at bodies returning to dust and imagine that bodies began in earth. The source asks whether the similarity points to shared memory. Again, we cannot know. But the Sumerian version is old. That is its power. The word Lulu stays. A made being, a worker, a mixed one, and the failures before the successful making remain beside it like shadows around a lamp. The story does not say the new being was happy. It does not say the new being understood. It does not say the yoke was explained. It simply says the burden was transferred. That is how many systems begin. Someone above is tired. Someone below is made or chosen to carry the weight. The myth names this with startling honesty. Human beings are born into a world already filled with tasks. We arrive and find the fields waiting, the canals silting, the records needing to be kept, the dead needing burial, the children needing food, the gods needing offerings, the questions needing answers. If the source is wrong about ancient engineering, the myth is still true about labor. If the source is right, then the myth may be truer and darker than we expected. Either way, the clay remembers that we began not with ease, but with assignment. Let the Lulu bear the yoke. The sentence lowers like evening over the fields. And after the worker is made, the story of humanity does not move only forward. It looks backward into an age before the flood, when kings ruled for spans no human body can hold, when time itself seems stretched beyond reason, and when a single line on a clay prism says the flood swept over, as if an entire version of the world was washed away between one column of names and the next. The prism in Oxford does not look like it should disturb anyone. It is clay, brown, upright, covered on four sides with careful columns of cuneiform. It is called the Weld-Blundell prism, and it preserves one of the most complete copies of the Sumerian king list. In a museum case, it seems modest, almost shy, the sort of object many visitors might pass after a quick glance. No gold, no yevils, no face, no dramatic monster carved along its side. Only names, only numbers, only time behaving impossibly. The text begins with a sentence that has followed many of these old mysteries like a shadow. When kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was an Eridu. Again, notice the movement. Kingship comes down. Authority descends. The office of rule arrives from above and settles first in Eridu, the city of Enki, the old city near the deep waters of origin and wisdom. The phrase is already strange enough, but then the list begins. Alulim ruled for 28,800 years. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. Other rulers follow, with reigns that stretch into numbers no ordinary human life can contain. The combined reigns before the flood reach hundreds of thousands of years in the Sumerian counting system. Then comes one short line. The flood swept over. After that, kingship is lowered from heaven again, now to Kish, and the reigns begin changing. They are still strange at first, sometimes long beyond ordinary life, but they gradually move closer to what history can recognize. Some figures after the flood connect with rulers and cities known from other evidence. The list becomes less impossible as it comes nearer to us. That smooth transition is what troubles the source. If the first section were only myth and the later section only history, one might expect a clear wall. Instead, The text flows from impossible time into recognizable time, as if the scribes saw one continuous chain, broken by catastrophe, but not divided in their minds into false and true. Mainstream scholars have many reasonable explanations. The long reigns may be symbolic. They may reflect base 60 numerology. They may use different units. They may magnify kings to make the past sacred. Ancient historiography often blends memory, theology, and political order. All of that is careful and necessary. But the source asks why the pattern is so persistent. Why preserve the impossible numbers across copies? Why place them in the same structure as more historical rulers? Why make the flood the line between vast lifespans and shrinking reigns? The same shape echoes elsewhere, in patriarchs living hundreds of years, in Egyptian lists of gods and demigods ruling before human kings, in old world ages where people lived far longer than now. Something about long life and a later shortening of life pressed itself deeply into human storytelling. The speculative reading is unsettling. Perhaps earlier human models, or rulers over humans, were not like us. Perhaps they lived far longer. Perhaps the flood marks not only a natural catastrophe, but a reset, a break between one form of humanity and another. A long-lived worker could become dangerous. A long-lived mind gathers experience like a river gathers silt. Over centuries, memory thickens. Skill grows. Authority settles. Rebellion becomes possible not only through anger, but through accumulated understanding. A short-lived worker begins again every generation. Each child learns from elders. Yes, but much is always lost. If one wanted control, lifespan would matter. This is only the source reading, not certainty. Modern biology explains human lifespans through evolution, cellular aging, disease, and environment. But in the inner logic of the Sumerian mythic world, lifespan is not a small detail. The gods endure. The earliest rulers reign impossibly long. After the flood, the numbers shrink. The flood becomes a line through time. Imagine the scribe copying it. Name after name. Number after number. Reign after reign. The stylus presses. The column fills. Then the short sentence arrives. The flood swept over. No long description. No thunder. No waves drawn in ink. Just one line, flat and devastating. The flood swept over. And after it, the world begins again, but not quite the same. This leads naturally into the me, because the flood does not only threaten lives, it threatens knowledge. A catastrophe can drown bodies, but it can also drown instructions. How to plant, how to judge, how to build, how to count, how to heal. Civilization is not only walls. It is remembered procedure. If memory breaks, the city falls, even if the bricks remain. The Sumerian me are among the most fascinating answers to that problem. They are usually translated as divine powers, decrees, principles, or civilizational gifts. Yet they behave strangely in the myths. They can be possessed. They can be transferred. They can be carried away. They can be lost. They can be restored. They are abstract and almost physical at the same time. In the myth of Inanna and Enki, Inanna travels to Eridu, the old city of Enki, and is welcomed with a feast. Beer flows. Conversation warms. Enki, in a state of divine generosity or divine drunkenness, gives her the me, one group after another. The list is astonishing. Kingship, priesthood, truth, writing, music, metalwork, craft, judgment, counsel, victory, descent to the underworld. Aspects noble and dangerous together, as if civilization is a chest where medicine and knife are stored side by side. Inanna receives them and leaves in her boat of heaven, carrying them toward Uruk. Then Enki sobers. He realizes what he has given away and sends his servant to retrieve them. Obstacles follow. Inanna is pursued. Her companion helps her overcome each challenge. At last she reaches Uruk with the me, and the city receives the powers of civilization. It is a wonderful story, almost comic in places. One can imagine Enki in the morning with the divine equivalent of regret, realizing that during the feast he has given away the operating system of society. But beneath the humor is a serious pattern. Knowledge moves. Civilization moves. A city becomes powerful not because it slowly invents every piece from nothing, but because it receives a set of ordered capacities. The mainstream reading sees political theology. Uruk legitimizes itself by claiming to have acquired divine powers from older Eridu. Inanna becomes the goddess who brings cultural greatness to her city. The tale explains rivalry, prestige, and sacred authority. The source hears blueprints, not metaphorical blueprints only, but packages of knowledge. Discret domaine. Each me covers one aspect of civilization. Together they form an operating manual for complex society. Kingship is not simply a crown, but a system of rule, succession, authority, taxation, and ritual. Scribeship is not merely writing, but archives, training, signs, lists, contracts, and memory. Metalwork is not just metal, but ore, heat, smelting, alloy, tool, and weapon. Law is not merely command, but judgment, precedent, penalty, oath, witness, and seal. If such knowledge arrived complete, it could explain why Sumerian civilization seems so organized so early in the source telling. Again, caution belongs here. Agriculture in the region did not appear overnight. Village life, trade, pottery, irrigation, and social complexity grew across many centuries. The me do not prove a download from heaven, but as story architecture, the source builds a compelling mood. The Sumerians themselves said the powers of civilization were given. They described them as transferable. They showed them moving from one sacred city to another. They remembered Eridu as first, Nippur as sacred, Uruk as brilliant, and kingship as lowered from heaven. The me become memory capsules. Civilization as something carried through catastrophe. Think of the tablet house again. A teacher copying old wisdom. A student pressing signs. A shelf holding lists. A city preparing without knowing that floods, fides, invasion, and language death will one day come. Every tablet is a small ark. Every list is a boat for knowledge. Every copied line is a refusal to let memory drown. The source connects the me to sudden knowledge in mathematics and astronomy. Base 60. Angles. Time. Planetary observations. Medical preparations. Legal reasoning. Architecture. Irrigation. It asks whether such systems were discovered slowly or received in organized form. Mainstream scholarship says they developed through human ingenuity over time, with many missing steps. The speculative reading says the Sumerians were honest when they said they inherited civilization from the gods. Both readings share one thing. They respect the Sumerians more than any simple view of primitive people would. These were builders of one of the earliest written worlds, and their myths were not simple fables. Whether the me were sacred symbols or memory of transferred knowledge, they show a people thinking deeply about what civilization is made of. Not stone alone, not kings alone. Civilization is made of repeatable knowledge. How to measure a field. How to settle a dispute. How to store grain. How to predict a season. How to train a scribe. How to remember the past after the flood swept over. The prism in Oxford and the myths of the me belong together because both deal with continuity. Kingship descends. Kings rule impossibly long. The flood cuts the world. Kingship descends again. Knowledge is held, moved, stolen, restored. The city survives by receiving what came before. This is the deeper emotional shape of the source. Humanity may have been made as workers. Yes, but workers were also given systems. The yoke came with instruction. The burden came with mathematics. The task came with writing. If the Anunnaki made the Lulu for labor, they also, according to the texts, gave tools of civilization that made the worker far more than a beast of burden. That is the contradiction. A controlled being given dangerous knowledge. A short-lived worker taught to write. A creature made to dig canals, learning to preserve the names of gods. A mixed being, if the source reading is followed, slowly becoming conscious of the mixture. The fire beside us grows quieter now. The prism turns in the imagination, one side catching museum light, then another. Alulim, Alalgar. Long reigns beyond human reach. Then the flood. Then shorter kings. Then cities and lists and scribes, and the me traveling like sealed sparks from Eridu to Uruk. The story is moving toward what was withheld. If knowledge descended, why not immortality? If wisdom was granted, why was eternal life denied? In another tablet, a man named Adapa is summoned to heaven and offered the food and water of life. His choice, or the deception that shapes his choice, will make the human condition feel even more deliberate and even more sorrowful. Adapa was wise enough to trouble the gods. That is how his story feels when it opens. Not with thunder, not with a city falling, but with a man in a boat on the waters near Eridu. He is remembered as a sage, a servant of Enki, a human made with vast understanding, a man who knows the patterns of the land and the proper service of the temple. He is close to wisdom, closer than ordinary people are meant to stand. But he is not immortal. The old text, says Enki, perfected broad understanding in him, but eternal life he did not give him. That sentence is quiet and almost easy to pass over. Wisdom given, eternal life withheld. The source holds it carefully because it suggests that human limitation is not merely an accident of flesh, but a boundary placed on purpose. Adapa goes out fishing to provide food for the temple. Imagine the morning there, the Persian Gulf breathing softly around the boat, the low light touching the water, the smell of salt and reeds and fish. His hands know the rhythm of the work. The boat rocks. The line is set. Eridu waits behind him, ancient and holy, city of Enki, city of deep waters, city where wisdom is not a decoration, but a force. Then the south wind overturns his boat. To the ancient world, wind is not just weather. It is agency. It moves with personality. It can favor, resist, destroy, or accuse. Adapa, angered by the disaster, breaks the wing of the south wind, and for 7 days the wind does not blow. The sky notices. Anu, the high god, asks why the south wind has ceased. Adapa is summoned upward to answer. The human sage must leave the lower world and enter the court of heaven, a place where ordinary humanity should not stand. Before he goes, Enki gives him instructions. He tells Adapa that he will be offered food and water in heaven. Do not eat. Do not drink. They are the food and water of death. Adapa trusts his creator. This is the tenderness and the tragedy of the story. A created being trusts the God who made him wise. He trusts the warning. He prepares himself. He goes upward, perhaps trembling, perhaps disciplined, perhaps repeating Enki words in his mind as the human world drops away beneath him. Now imagine Anu Court. Not a room as we know a room, but a height, a brightness, a place of authority so still that every sound feels measured. Adapa stands there as a human among gods. He explains himself. He behaves properly. He impresses them. The court does not destroy him. Instead, Anu is moved, or at least intrigued. He offers Adapa the food of life and the water of life, the very thing Enki warned him to refuse. Adapa refuse. He will not eat. He will not drink. Then Anu is surprised. Why did you not eat? Why did you not drink? You will not have eternal life. The moment is devastating because the door had opened. Immortality, at least in the logic of the tale, was available. It was placed before him, not stolen, not hidden, offered. But the man with wisdom refuses because the God who made him told him not to receive it. Mainstream scholarship reads this as wisdom literature about human limits. Adapa is wise, but not immortal. Humans may approach divine knowledge, but not divine life. The story explains why death belongs to us. It teaches that even the wisest human remains human before the gods. That reading is strong. But the source hears something sharper. It hears design. Adapa was given intelligence, but not eternal life. Then, when another god offered what had been withheld, Enki prevented him from taking it. The limitation was not only natural, it was maintained. The boundary was guarded. If humans were made as Lulu, as workers with intelligence enough to serve, then immortality would be dangerous. A short life keeps knowledge broken into generations. A long life gathers memory. A person who lives for centuries does not merely remember more. He becomes a library with hands. He can compare rulers, see patterns, keep secrets, improve tools, teach rebels, refuse to forget. A worker with too much time becomes hard to govern. That is the source reading. It is speculative. It is not the academic consensus. Yet the myth gives the thought a place to sit. Wisdom granted. Immortality withheld. A heavenly offer refused because the Creator has warned the creation away from it. I have always found the saddest part to be Adapa obedience. He does what he was told. He survives the court of heaven by trusting the instruction, and that trust costs him what humans have dreamed of ever since. The food is before him. The water is before him. The cup does not empty into his mouth. The bread does not become part of his body. The door closes quietly. After Adapa, the story turns downward, into another kind of limit. Inanna descends. She is not human. She is the queen of heaven, bright, dangerous, restless, full of power and beauty and will. Yet even she must obey the rules of the place below. The myth says she sets her mind on the underworld, the realm of her sister Ereshkigal, and prepares to go down. Before leaving, she gives instructions to her faithful servant, Ninhursag. If she does not return after 3 days, the servant must appeal to the gods in a precise order. That detail matters. It feels like protocol, a contingency plan. Someone entering a dangerous process leaves instructions in case the process fails. Inanna approaches the first gate. The underworld does not open all at once. It opens in stages. 7 gates stand between her and the throne room below. At each gate, something is removed. Crown, necklace, beads, breastplate, ring, measuring rod, garment. The names vary across versions and translations, but the movement is steady. Power is stripped from her 1 layer at a time. Imagine it slowly. The first gate, and the crown leaves her head. The air changes. The second gate, and jewels are removed from her neck. Metal cools as it passes from skin. The third gate, and another symbol of authority is taken. Step by step, she becomes less adorned, less armed, less defined by office. Each object taken is not only decoration, it is a piece of identity, a role, a power, a right to command. By the 7th gate, she stands bare before the underworld, reduced, vulnerably, No crown, no evils, no divine signs to protect her from the law of that place. Then she is judged. She dies. Her body is hung in stillness. The story is dark, but we can speak it softly. The Queen of Heaven becomes silent in the house of no return. Mainstream scholarship reads the descent as a myth of fertility, power, death, and seasonal renewal. Inanna going down and returning reflects cycles of life, loss, vegetation, and sacred kingship. It is ritual drama, theology, and poetry, and it has deep beauty in that form. The source asks whether another memory lies beneath the ritual. 7 stages of stripping. Identity reduced to essence. Death. Reconstitution. Return only through a substitute. It wonders if the myth preserves the image of a process, not only an afterlife journey, but a controlled passage through dissolution and restoration. A kind of ancient memory of identity deconstruction and reconstruction, described with the only symbols available. Garments become attributes. Gates become stages. The underworld becomes a chamber of transformation. We cannot know, but the rules are precise. 7 gates. Specific removals. 3-day delay. Enki intervention. Created helpers sent below. Food and water of life used to revive her. A substitute required before she can return. The underworld is not chaos in the myth. It is a system with procedures. That is why the source places Inanna beside Adapa. Adapa shows the withheld road to immortality. Inanna shows a road through death, but one not available to ordinary humans. The gods may pass through processes we only remember in stories. Humans hear the story and turn it into ritual hope. Resurrection. Return. A life beyond the gate. A soul preserved. A self restored after the body fails. Perhaps these are spiritual truths. Perhaps they are symbolic. Perhaps they are old memories of capacities lost or reserved for beings above us. The source does not demand certainty. It lets the parallels gather like dust in a shaft of light. Then comes Shuruppak. The instructions of Shuruppak are among the oldest wisdom texts we possess. They are practical, almost homely in places, and that is what makes them so moving. A father speaks to his son. Do not steal. Do not be arrogant. Do not quarrel without need. Do not move boundary stones. Care for your household. Watch your words. Respect the social order. Manage life wisely. No lightning. No cosmic machinery. Only advice. But the son in the tradition is Yusudra, the flood survivor, the Sumerian figure behind later flood heroes. This means the instructions stand at the edge of catastrophe. Pre-flood wisdom preserved for the one who will pass through the waters. If the flood is myth, then the setting gives authority to the wisdom. If the flood is memory, then the text becomes something more haunting. A backup. A packet of ordinary civilization carried across disaster. What should survive the end of a world? Not only star maps, not only divine secrets, basic counsel, how to live without tearing the village apart. how to speak, how to work, how to avoid foolish conflicts, how to preserve order when everything else has been broken. That may be the gentlest idea in the whole dark story. Civilization is not saved only by kings and temples. It is saved by small instructions copied carefully, by a father telling a son not to make stupid choices near a boundary stone, by a student pressing a line into clay because someone before him thought it mattered. The source sees Shuruppak as part of the larger pattern. Knowledge is granted. Knowledge is limited. Knowledge is preserved. Humanity receives enough to build and work, but not enough to escape death completely. Enough wisdom to serve and survive, but not enough to become equal to the makers. The tablet house becomes humanity, answer to mortality. We cannot live forever. So we copy. We cannot keep every elder alive. So we write. We cannot stop the flood. So we build boats for memory. Outside the firelit room, the night is calm now. Inside the story, Adapa stands before untouched bread. Inanna passes through 7 gates. Shuruppak speaks to his son while the future waters wait beyond the edge of the text. Wisdom is given. Immortality is withheld. Memory is made portable. And the oldest scribes keep pressing words into clay, as if they know that one day, far beyond the flood, far beyond the cities, someone will need to ask what had been given to humans and what had been kept from us. Now the tablets gather around us like quiet witnesses. The creation tablet behind museum glass. The school lists from Nippur. The Atrahasis fragments. The stories of Enki and Ninhursag. The prism in Oxford. The me carried from Eridu to Uruk. Adapa before the food of life. Inanna at the 7th gate. Shuruppak speaking wisdom toward a world that may soon drown. Each piece alone can be read safely. Myth, ritual, wisdom, theology, political memory, social explanation. That is the mainstream position, and it deserves respect. Scholars have spent lifetimes learning Sumerian, Akkadian, sign forms, grammar, manuscript traditions, and the deep habits of ancient Near Eastern literature. They know how dangerous it is to force modern meanings onto old words. They know that clay and blood in myth may not mean biology. They know that gods are not technicians simply because they act with sequence. They know that ritual can preserve detail without preserving laboratory procedure. The cautious reading says this. The Sumerians were explaining human life. We are made from earth, so the texts speak of clay. We have consciousness, so the texts speak of divine essence. We work, so the texts say we were made to bear toil. Wedi, so Adapa refuses eternal life. We hope for return, so Inanna descends and rises. We fear catastrophe, so Shuruppak preserves wisdom before the flood. We build civilization, so the me become divine powers that order society. In that reading, the texts are not less profound. They are profoundly human. They turn labor, mortality, memory, law, and longing into sacred story. They do what myth has always done. giving shape to the forces that press on every life. This may be the correct reading. We should let that sentence stand clearly. And yet, the source asks us to sit with the details that do not easily fall asleep. The creation language is procedural. The same materials return. The same roles return. Clay, blood, mixing, birth goddess, Enki, worker, yoke. The failed forms before the successful human look like attempts and corrections. The 10-month gestation detail feels strangely biological. The Lulu designation feels more like a function than a romantic name for humanity. The king list moves from impossible lifespans to shorter reigns through the flood. The me behave like transferable knowledge packages. Adapa is given wisdom but denied immortality. Inanna moves through staged deconstruction and return. The Sumerians claim their civilization was given, lowered, brought, transferred, not merely invented. The source does not say this proves everything. It says the pattern is difficult to ignore. So let us place the two readings side by side under the same low lamp. In the mainstream reading, clay is sacred earth. In the speculative reading, clay is terrestrial biological material. In the mainstream reading, divine blood is the mythic life force that gives humans spirit and mind. In the speculative reading, divine blood is genetic essence, inherited information, the life code of another kind. In the mainstream reading, mixing is ritual formation. In the speculative reading, mixing is integration, hybridization, modification. In the mainstream reading, the birth goddess represents fertility and divine motherhood. In the speculative reading, she presides over gestation, development, and the reproductive process needed to stabilize the new being. In the mainstream reading, the Lulu is humanity as worker under temple theology. In the speculative reading, the Lulu is a purpose-built labor species, capable enough to serve, limited enough to remain below its makers. Both readings are unsettling in different ways. The mythic reading says humans were born to labor under cosmic order. The speculative reading says humans may have been designed to labor under an external order. Neither is especially flattering. Perhaps that is why the story has power. It refuses to begin with human greatness. It begins with need, burden, clay, and something added. Now, the source reaches beyond the tablets into biology. This is the most contested ground, and we should walk carefully. Modern science explains human origins through evolution. Our species emerged through long processes of natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, migration, interbreeding, and adaptation across deep time. We share ancestry with other life on Earth. Our bonds, genes, cells, and needs belong to this planet. We are not separate from nature in a simple way. We are nature, thinking about itself by firelight. That is the academic ground. The source, however, asks whether certain human traits feel like imperfect integration. It points to the fusion of human chromosome 2, where 2 ancestral ape chromosomes correspond to one fused human chromosome. Mainstream genetics explains this as an evolutionary event in our lineage. not evidence of engineering. The source reads it as an intriguing seam. It points to rapid changes in cognition, symbolic behavior, language, art, and technology. Though science sees these as complex developments across long periods, not an instant leap, it points to difficult childbirth. As large human brains and upright walking create dangerous trade-offs, it points to back pain, fragile joint, autoimmune problems, strange sleep patterns, and the sense that our bodies are brilliant but often poorly fitted to their own ambitions. Some of these are real biological puzzles. But puzzles are not proof. Evolution does not produce perfect machines. It produces workable compromises. The spine that carries us upright was shaped from older structures. The pelvis balances walking and birth. The brain is costly. The immune system is powerful and sometimes misfires. A species can be fully earthborn and still awkward in its own body. The source knows, or should know, that the biological argument is not settled by discomfort. Still, the feeling remains. Humans are animals, but strange animals. We make tools that leave the atmosphere. We bury our dead with meaning. We count stars. We write creation stories on clay. We build cities, destroy forests, compose lullabies, invent mathematics, and lie awake wondering why we exist. We belong to Earth, yet often feel homesick for a sky we have never visited. That last feeling is not evidence in the scientific sense, but it is powerful in the mythic sense. And this is where the Sumerian texts become more than a fringe puzzle. They become a mirror for a very old human unease. We are made of mud and starlight, soil and imagination, appetite and abstraction. We eat, sleep, age, and die like other animals, then look upward and ask questions large enough to frighten gods. If the tablets are myth, they express that condition with startling honesty. If they are memory, they may preserve a stranger origin. If they are both, then perhaps myth is the only vessel strong enough to carry a memory too old for ordinary history. Return now to the museum. The room is almost empty. The tablet waits behind glass. The label offers cautious words. Creation myth. Sumerian. Old Babylonian copy. Provenance. Nippur. The catalog number has been written in modern systems, but the tablet itself does not care what shelf we put it on. It keeps its own sentence. Humans made from clay and divine essence. A worker formed by mixing. A burden transferred. A life limited. A knowledge given. A flood remembered. A civilization rebuilt from instructions. The story has traveled far tonight, but it ends where it began, with clay. Clay is humble. It sticks to hands. It cracks when too dry. It takes shape under pressure. It can become a bowl, a brick, a tablet, a seal, a wall, a toy, an idol, a record. Clay is earth-made writable. Maybe that is why the Sumerian origin is so haunting. If humans are clay, then we are earth made aware. If humans are mixed clay, then we are earth altered by something beyond earth. If humans are Lulu, then we are workers who learned to ask about the workshop. The tablet does not settle the question. It never did. It only preserves it. Mythology or memory, symbol or specification, metaphor or manual. Each word is a doorway, and the tablet leaves them all slightly open. The safest answer is that these are myths, deep and meaningful stories from an ancient civilization, not records of genetic engineering. That is the answer scholarship can defend with the strongest evidence. But the story we have followed tonight is not about replacing scholarship with certainty. It is about listening to the old unease in the text, the strange precision, the repeated sequence, the discomfort of being called mixed and made for work. So perhaps the final question should be softer. Not, did the Sumerians prove humans are not from Earth? They did not prove that. But why did one of the oldest written civilizations describe us as mixed beings, shaped from Earth and a higher essence, made for labor, given knowledge, denied immortality, and left to remember all this in clay? That question can rest beside you. It does not need to keep you awake. The fire is low now. The room is warm. The old tablets return to their cases. Nippur sinks back into dust. The Abzu waters become dark and still. Enki keeps his secrets. The birth goddess washes clay from her hands. Adapa leaves the bread of life untouched. Inanna rises from the underworld with shadows in her eyes. Sharupak speaks one more line of wisdom to a son who must survive the flood. And above all of them, the stars remain. Perhaps they are only stars. Perhaps they are memory. Perhaps they are why human beings, made of earth or more than earth, keep looking upward with the strange ache of creatures who are home and not entirely home. Let the question fade into the dark. Let the clay cool. Let the fire hold the room. Let the museum sleep. Let the first tablet keep its silence. Let the old word Lulu soften until it is only a dark stone in the palm, warm from being held. Good night.